It's time to kick ass and chew bubble gum, and I am all out of gum.
Hey there guys, Nordic Warrior here, welcome back to my video game review series. Today we're going to be looking at Duke Nukem for the PS1, released in 1997, developed by 3D Realms and Aardvark Software. This game is known in America as Duke Nukem Total Meltdown, however here in Europe it's known simply as Duke Nukem, or Duke Nukem PS1. So this game is essentially a PS1 port of the original Duke Nukem 3D, released the previous year on the PC. Duke Nukem 3D is generally regarded by many to be one of the best first-person shooters to be released in the 90s. It's generally considered to be the game that made the Duke Nukem license what it is today, and it's one that many PC gamers remember fondly. As you might expect with the massive success of the original PlayStation in the late 90s, many video game developers and publishers wanted a piece of that action. As a result of this, you would see many games that had been originally released for the PC that had become popular, later being ported over to the PlayStation 1. Due to the technical limitations of the time and many of these ports tending to vary in quality, a lot of the PS1 ports weren't as popular as you might think, and they tended to vary in quality, with most of the games playing at a much lower resolution and not always being able to get the control scheme right. So how good is Duke Nukem Total Meltdown in this regard? Let's talk about it. So the game is a first-person shooter where you play as Duke Nukem, the badass of all badasses, as he looks to blast his way through hordes of alien scum to save the human race from invasion. It was this game that really set the overall tone for the Duke Nukem series, and it was the character of Duke himself, as well as the badass shooting mechanics, that captured the imagination of gamers. Not only could you absolutely blow the crap out of aliens with an assortment of badass weapons, but you would do so with a particular style. Duke would come out with some hilarious one-liners throughout the game, mostly action movie references, and the character of Duke is basically a satire of classic 80s and 90s action movie heroes, voiced of course by the legendary John St. John, who gives Duke his hilarious and badass personality. The game is split up into 4 episodes. You have the original 3 episodes from the PC version, which are practically the same as the PC version with only very minor changes. And you also have a new 4th episode which was made exclusively for the PS1 version of the game. The first episode is called LA Meltdown, which as you might expect takes place in LA. LA has basically been invaded by hordes of hostile aliens, and in addition to kidnapping the babes, they also screwed up Duke's ride.
Damn, those alien bastards are gonna pay for shooting up my ride.
And imagine they regretted that. Duke will have to, surprise surprise, blast his way through the streets of LA and wipe out the aliens. The second episode is called Lunar Apocalypse, which takes place entirely in space. It starts with the EDF space station having been taken over by aliens, and Duke has to go there to clean up their mess. Parts of the episode also take place on the moon, and you have several unique alien-type looking locations. The third level is called Shrapnel City. Just like the first episode, this one takes place entirely on Earth, and Duke has to deal with an alien invasion on an even larger scale this time, and even confront their leader, the Cycloid Emperor. Like I said before, these levels are practically identical to their original PC versions, at least in terms of their overall level design and gameplay. And finally you have a 4th episode that was exclusive to the PS1 version. This episode is called Plug and Pray. This episode is very different from the other 3 in terms of its overall tone, and you can tell it was made at a different time. Most of this episode consists of popular movie and video game references, and the story of it involves Duke wanting to stop a giant robot who the aliens have made to fight Duke. As far as the overall gameplay goes, this is about as good a first-person shooter as you could possibly expect for the time. Thankfully the game has an auto-aiming system which is pretty accurate, so you won't be getting as frustrated with the controls as you might expect. It's a game that's incredibly fast paced, which suits the overall tone of the game, and for its time, it was incredibly violent and gory. You can literally dismember and splatter enemies, and dispatch of them in a variety of different ways. One of the things I love about the game is the overall level design. Levels are designed in a somewhat maze-like fashion, with enemies and curiosities being scattered all over the place. The game rewards you for your exploration by including numerous secret areas hidden around each level, with some pretty cool and creative ways of hiding them. In many of these secret areas you will find some pretty funny Easter eggs, as well as weapons and useful items, some of which can be vital for getting through certain parts of the game, depending on how well you know the levels. This of course gives you an incentive to explore the game as much as possible, and try and find as many cool secrets, weapons and items as you possibly can. The game has a huge variety of weapons. First of all, you start off with a standard pistol, which is the weakest gun in the game, but is better than nothing. You have a badass shotgun, which is especially deadly at close range. Seriously, I found myself using the shotgun most of the time, and it was probably my favourite weapon in the game since I personally found it to be the most practical and the most plentiful when I needed it. You have a chain gun cannon, also known as a Ripper cannon, which is basically a machine gun that is rapid fire and slightly more effective from range. You have an RPG which holds 5 rockets and can blow up most enemies in one hit. You also have some more unique and quirky weapons such as a shrinker which shrinks enemies, allowing Duke to squash them with his mighty foot. This is especially effective against bigger, tougher enemies that might take a while to bring down. You can defeat most of them just by shrinking them and squashing them. Or a freezer which freezes enemies, allowing Duke to smash them to pieces. You have pipe bombs which are extremely deadly remote grenades that can completely dismember enemies, as well as trip mines. And of course one of the most badass and most iconic video game weapons of all time, the Devastator. The Devastator is a weapon that embodies everything that is Duke. A twin rapid fire rocket launcher that makes you feel insanely powerful. Be sure to conserve your ammo for the Devastator because it's the type of weapon that can really bail you out in a difficult fight. Just be careful of your own rockets and explosives of course. Seriously, how bad is the Devastator? What a weapon. You also have a melee attack called the Mighty Foot, where Duke basically kicks enemies and obstacles. In addition to weapons, you have several usable items that you can find scattered around the levels. You can find health packs, some of which are portable and can be used at any time. You have night vision goggles that help you see in the dark of course. You have steroids that make Duke faster, a hollow Duke which can be used to distract enemies, and my personal favourite, a jetpack. Seriously, the jetpack is a lot of fun to use and once again, just like the Devastator, it can bail you out in some dangerous situations such as boss battles or just finding your way when you're lost. The jetpack has limited fuel though, so be sure to ration it as best you can. The game has plenty of enemy variety. You have your standard alien enemies such as Assault Captain and Assault Trooper. You have Pig Cops which are basically human law enforcement who have been mutated and brainwashed by the aliens to turn on the human race. You have slightly tougher enemies such as the Enforcers, enemies that attack you from the air such as recon vehicles and Octobrains. You have smaller annoying enemies such as the Slimers that get right in your face and try to smother you. They are easy to defeat though, just annoying. And those absolutely infuriating sentry drones that fly right at you and explode right in your face. Seriously, enemies like this are one of the worst things about first person shooters, and the second episode is full of them, but I digress. You have Assault Commanders who are essentially huge flying enemies that fire rockets at you, and perhaps the toughest enemies in the game, the Battle Lord Sentries. These are basically like mini bosses. Speaking of bosses, each episode ends with its own boss battle. These bosses are quite tough and challenging, so make sure you save your ammo in your most powerful weapons for when you reach the boss, because you might need them to win. You will no doubt find your own way to win the boss battles and find a way to exploit the AI. That's one of the things that really impressed me about this game in retrospect. The AI for a game released in 1996 is actually pretty good. Sometimes a little bit too good. Seriously, enemies can be insanely accurate at times. The icing on the cake is that in addition to the combat, exploration, and overall mayhem, you can also find several interactive areas which serve no purpose other than to entertain. For example, you can relax and play a game of pool, or even sing karaoke.
Born to be wild.
Or even stop to take a leak. Seriously, this game has so many pointless interactive items that just do their bit to make the game a little bit more quirky and a little bit more fun. They don't really serve a lot of purpose, but I enjoy it that they're there. I mean, they're fun and they give the game some much needed personality. Unfortunately though, the game does have some flaws. First of all, there are some really annoying difficulty spikes here and there, as well as some ridiculously cheap deaths. I mentioned before how the game has some annoying enemies such as the sentry drones, and these always seem to be in the most inconvenient areas of the game. I also wasn't a big fan of the 4th episode. Some of the levels here are an absolute pain in the ass, seriously an absolute nightmare. The overall level design of them, as well as the placement of enemies and stuff like that, doesn't make a lot of sense. Sure, the whole game is pretty maze-like, but at least in the other episodes you had some indication of what you were supposed to do and where you were supposed to go, however small that indication was, and there was at least a little bit of room for error here and there. But on the 4th episode there's very little room for error in any of the levels. A lot of the level design just felt like padding in the worst way. Short levels that feel longer than they are due to all the misdirection and cheap deaths. There's one level in particular called Nightmare Zone, and that level is an absolute nightmare, so they got the name right. This level had me running around like a blue-arsed fly, with absolutely no idea what I was meant to do, or where I was meant to go. Also, there were levels here where you had to do an insane amount of backtracking. Some of the levels were okay in the later part of the episode, but inconsistent in their quality overall. You do get a boss battle at the end just like the other episodes, and this was pretty cool. Another problem I had with it is the game's overall technicalities. The game has some absolutely horrendous frame rate issues, and this can be really distracting at times. As I mentioned before, with this being a PS1 port of a PC game from 1996, this was always going to be a poor looking game. But to be fair, Duke 3D was never that great a looking game, even for the time. So I can't be too harsh on this port in regards to its overall graphics and presentation. The game has a great soundtrack also, and it really suits the tone of the game in my opinion. So that pretty much sums up my thoughts on Duke Nukem Total Meltdown. I think it's a great game despite some of the questionable design choices in the 4th episode, and some technical issues such as frame rate and graphics. I still really enjoyed the game for what it was. If you are going to check this game out, I recommend it for a cheap price, especially if you are a fan of the original PlayStation as I am. But if you're a PC gamer, you're probably better off just sticking with the PC version, or even checking out the Xbox 360 version, which is pretty good also, but it's up to you. I think this version was okay for what it was. Thanks for watching guys, I had a lot of fun playing Duke Nukem on the PS1. And it was a fascinating game to check out in retrospect. Let me know what you guys think. Once again, I have a lot of reviews coming to the channel in the near future. Thanks for watching and God bless.